Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here bright and early. I really appreciate it. Let me know if you can't hear me. We just fixed the mic, but I think we should be good. Okay. So what I'm going to do today is, my name is Sheehan. I am with Kantar Retail Market Insights. And my background is one where I kind of touched on everything. So I actually started my career, sadly, about 15 years ago, starting with General Mills. And so I have been on the branded manufacturer side. Then I actually went and I worked with Kantar, both with their private label business and with their branded businesses. And then I've done a stint at, in all honesty, any possible marketing research firm that you can imagine. I've spent time at Intel, I've spent time at Nielsen, at Ipsos, doing new product development. And then I am now at Kantar Retail and have been here for about 5 years. And I currently lead the grocery channel practice for our company, along with all things category management from a macro level. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some of the basics of private label. But what I want to do is give you a peek behind the curtain of a lot of things that you know, but really help you to understand how we talk to both your competitors and talk to retail partners about the private label business and where it fits, and what you can learn from across the world. As we know in the US, we are essentially somewhat underdeveloped versus what we see in a lot of the countries in Europe. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at best practices, as Joe mentioned, not only in the US, with some of those retailers you might work with today, but also look to a few of the retailers in Europe and see some of the really cool things they're doing, not only in individual countries, but holistically. So what we're going to do is we're really going to just start with the basics. This is probably stuff you know, but want to double check and validate. And then we'll go into the case studies and talk about what to do next. So right now, one of the biggest things to understand, and I think it's something inherently that you do understand, but your branded competitors don't always get this. They don't understand exactly why. They have an idea of why retailers have private label, but they look at it more as a hindrance and less as an opportunity. And the thing is you think about it from a retailer's perspective, right? Finance, brand, and operations all play a role in the decisions that they make as they decide what private label products to carry. From a finance perspective, private label gives that retailer control over margins, but it also actually creates an opportunity to break up the very simple price comparison that shoppers do when looking at a branded product like Cheerios and the price it sells for at Walmart versus the price it sells for at Aldi versus the price it sells for at Jewel or at Giant or Stop and Shop, right? So if you throw in a private label product, it is impossible to price compare, which allows you to kind of stand apart and defend against the really strong pricing wars that we see on branded products today, and that are likely going to get more challenging as you have Amazon and Walmart and Aldi starting to fight over who has the lowest price, which is a place that no one really wants to be at. From a brand perspective, private label really creates an opportunity for your retail partners to stand apart. And a lot of times we see them doing this with increasingly sophisticated tiers of private label that you make possible. Now, what's interesting about this model is it's not a new model. It's a model that's learned in looking at counterparts in Europe and seeing how they approach the business. But in doing so, what you have been able to do is see retailers like Kroger really evolve into a place in which they have traditional private label that we all kind of have grown up with, all the way up to brands that are truly transcendent and stand on their own. And that is something, particularly as that we have Aldi continuing to grow, Trader Joe's continuing to grow, and Lidl coming into the marketplace. We are going to see more and more of the regional players look to become more sophisticated in private label. And so as they do that, they're going to need help in identifying the right categories, and within the right categories, the right offer to sell separate and differentiate themselves in the marketplace. And from an operations perspective, this comes down to control. In a private label world, they control the quality of the products, they control the flavor of the products and the assortment, they control the process. Inherently, as retailers, everything is about operational efficiency. This gives them the opportunity to have control in the one place where they don't have control over a lot of what's out there. Now, as we continue, and I'm having trouble with the clicker, so I apologize, but as we continue, one of the things that we see is we have seen some pretty strong growth in private label over the last few years. And if growth is on track, what we're going to anticipate is being at about $120 billion in sales for private label. The catch is, as we see the increase in some of these retailers that I just mentioned, like Aldi and Lidl, my expectation is you are going to see private label sales increase at a faster rate in the next 5 years than we have in the past 5 years. And it's inherently because the U.S. shopper is more open to private label today than they ever have been. And even more exciting is the fact that from an audience perspective, as you think of the U.S. shopper, millennials, beginning family shoppers, tend to be much more open about private label. They don't have the hang-ups, that legacy of past perception that older shoppers have in the private label space. So when you have retailers doing private label well, you have shoppers who are open to it. It's that perfect situation to see a jump in growth. What we also see is inherently, we as Americans in U.S. grocery have always followed the leader, with Europe and Asia really driving the trends that we see here. And what we know today is that at a macro level, yes, we are in a good position for private label. We have 18% share roughly from a dollar perspective. But when you compare that to where the more similar countries are in Europe, like the UK, like Switzerland, we honestly have room to grow without hurting the larger profitability of the grocery space. And so I would anticipate further growth. As you then continue on, one of the other reasons I say we have an opportunity is inherently there are very large, very densely populated portions of the country where we're underrepresented versus the north. So as you think of the Midwest and those middle countries, we're very comfortable with private label. But we have a gap on both the East Coast and the West Coast. And I would argue a lot of that is driven by the retailers that play there. With Albertsons Safeway as kind of the dominant player on the West Coast, they've always struggled to figure out how exactly to play. And then, as they went and they started going through all of the merger and acquisition processes of the last few years, private label kind of became something that was sidelined. I would anticipate, because they actually have some really good offers. President's Choice for Safeway used to be the thing. And now it's kind of sidelined itself as they focus on other initiatives. I anticipate that will change. I also anticipate that they are going to be focusing more in private label on the no-she space, which is natural, organic, specialty, I'm missing the H for some reason, and ethnic. So it's this idea of those specialty foods, those organic foods that are right on trend today across the country. On the other side, with the East Coast, with Lidl and Aldi really making a push, Awful Delhi's finally kind of getting themselves put together and now ready to move forward and grow, I think you're going to see a lot more investment there and a lot more creativity there. What's interesting here, and I can say this, I was at a meeting with a retailer, a smaller regional player in the East Coast, who actually is very innovative. They're a strong brand. Anyone would know them if I said them. And the one thing that they said in a meeting with me about a month and a half ago was outright. We want to do more in private label. But because we are a smaller player, it's hard to get unique items just for me. And what's interesting there is I can tell you as private label manufacturers something that I actually do tell branded manufacturers all the time. With private label runs, knowing that you need to meet a certain threshold, if you have an idea or a retailer has an idea for a private run on their own. Consider other retailers that are innovative in non-competitive regions. So one of the things that we tell manufacturers as a whole is, I don't know if you know this, but H-E-B, Meijer, they're constantly talking. They don't touch each other. They do not compete. You can bring a concept to both of them that's unique and different. They'll never touch. The shoppers will never know. If you threw in a small regional player, let's say it's Wegmans, let's say it's Giant Eagle, as long as they're not touching, and Giant Eagle and not going to touch, so we'll pretend I do say that. But with that said, that idea of thinking outside the box and saying, okay, they may not have the size and scale of Kroger, but if I sold that same offer to 3 different retailers that are dispersed across the country and don't touch, now does it have the scale I need to make it profitable? And if you approach it that way, you start to have different offers. Now what we also see is, again, this is the shopper piece. What we've seen from a branded perspective is that, from a branded perspective, shoppers are still primarily buying traditional national brands. So as you go into the center store, as you go into snacks, as you go into some of those areas, you haven't seen the switch. But the switch is not impossible. And it's driven by the offer in the store, the accessibility to different things. What we see as we look at these places where private brands is really made the flush, shoppers are receptive. Almost 2/3 of shoppers, the last time they went to a store and bought milk, were a private label. A lot of that's driven by the retailer, but it's also driven by the shoppers being open to the private label product. And I think that's what you're going to see is, as trust grows, interest in private brands outside of just some of those perimeter categories is going to grow as well. Now, when we talk to shoppers and we ask them, why are you choosing private label for your food and beverage across categories? It's not really surprising that price went up. Inherently with private branded products, price is the motivating factor, but experience is just as important, right? If they have a good experience, if you can get them to try it, it is highly likely you can get them to repeat purchase. And so that goes to both quality, but also the uniqueness of the offer. It's got to taste good, which you guys have products we saw yesterday with taste tests. You have products that win out on taste all the time. So you just got to get it in the basket for the first time. Working with your retailer to do that. And even potentially talking to branded, national branded manufacturers who don't compete with you, but who complement you. Is there a way that you can look at promotions, working with a retailer, that connect you to a branded product that's popular in a meal solution, or something like that, that gets you in the door the first time? What's also interesting, and this is why I said the time is right, is when you look at how this breaks out by generation, you have a lot less inhibition in what shoppers perceive as private label when you start to get younger. And so if you look at the boomers, boomers inherently tend to be less likely to focus on some of the unique aspects or the quality aspects. They're not as open to saying my private label product is better products, or better ingredients, or it's higher quality than the brand. Millennials are. But the challenge with millennials, and part of it is just because of life stage, but part of it is just because of age. They are less likely to have had a past experience with private label products. You've got to get it in millennial shoppers' baskets, in Gen X shoppers' baskets. Once you do, you have a shopper for life. You just got to get them to try it. The good news, though, is the trust is there. You're not in a place where you have to convince them that private label is just as good as branded. If you see here in the first 2 lines, we really looked at kind of from a retailer perspective, how do you trust the products that you buy, and from a brand, how do you trust the products that you buy? They trust the retailer. You don't have that hurdle of saying, I'm a private label product, so maybe the shopper doesn't trust that I'm as good as a branded product. Because inherently the trust is in the retailer. As long as that retailer is the one who's put you in their store, they're going to trust that you're just as good. So then, as we continue on, what I want to take you through is framework, right? So as we talk to people as a whole, what we try to do is help them understand within private label how to look at it from a retailer's lens and a shopper's lens. And what we see is really, we see things breaking out into a four-box quadrant, right? A, we're Kantar retail, so we kind of live in these, we can't help ourselves. But B, it actually just intuitively makes sense. So if you look at the axes, and you really think of it from x-axis perspective is brand versus finance. If they're making a decision about private label and it's exclusively about margin, it stays under finance. If they make a decision about brand, it's really about enhancing the brand that they have as a retailer and making it mean more. If you then take that and you look at it as to what does the brand really mean, on the reflective side, it is saying, I want a private label that ultimately just reflects the brand as I am, right? It doesn't mean anything more. It doesn't stand on its own. It only exists as a way to connect to me as a retailer. If you take it then up and move up the y-axis, where you get to is an incandescent brand. A brand that on its own means something to shoppers. And where half the shoppers may not even realize it's a private label product, unless you told them. And there are brands like that that really matter. So when you go through and you think about it, where you started, and this is where things started for us, is if you go into that bottom quadrant on the, I don't know my left and my right, on the left-hand side, those are really trade down brands. That's where we started years ago. It's the white box with the black label that doesn't even have a brand on it. It's just Tostitos versus Cheerios. Now, there's a lot of brands out there that really are going after that opening price point. We know who they are. We can probably think of them right now. As you move along and you look at the brands that are both reflective but also brand focused, these are the brands where the retailer in and of itself is strong enough that it can have something unique, but it really hasn't differentiated itself. As you move up and around, the corner brands over here, these are the brands that stand on their own. And they're pretty darn cool. I bet every one of us has something in our cupboards that come from those brands. And they can cross. They can be grocery, they can be HBC, they can be apparel. But they stand on their own. So as you think about that, and as you think about talking to your retailers about what you might bring to them for innovation, as what you might want to talk about for an evolution, this gives you an idea of where you want to focus. So if you are down and you're looking and talking to Walmart about great value, you're not going to bring cool ideas, most innovative ideas. At the end of the day, that is all about price. That is all they care about. Give me the best margin on a product that's as close as it can be, and I'm happy. I don't need anything else. As you move along the continuum, you can see here some of these ideas. Yes, it is a little more upscale. It's still connected to me. People know it belongs to me as a retailer. I don't need your coolest innovation, but I want to be able to charge just a little bit more for it. I don't want it to be the lowest price on the shelf no matter what. As you move into those really incandescent brands that stand on their own, did you have this in mind when I was explaining it? Because this is what we were thinking of. Simple Truth is a $1.7 billion brand as of Kroger's fiscal year. Simple Truth is now not even being sold in Kroger stores. Thanks to Vibe Cost, Simple Truth is one of the top brands in some of the categories they compete in New York City, where Kroger has no presence. Simple Truth stands on its own. Kirkland's Signature. I have a Costco club membership exclusively because of Kirkland's Signature. They make some darn good wine. But that's the thing. These are brands that drive you to the store, and you can only find them at their store. These are trip drivers in and of themselves. And that's where you have the time to play and have some fun and get a little innovative and creative. And what's interesting is this is where the branded manufacturers in non-competitive categories are also going to be most willing to want to partner with private label with their retailer. Because this brand is just as valuable as their brand in a store. And I'm not talking about from a profit perspective, I am talking from a brand value perspective. These are brands in and of themselves. And then products as a whole. They've got some amazing products. But it's still tied to that brand. You're not going to have a simple truth in Aldi. They'll have an Aldi-based concept. Even as you look at their organic line and some of their premium lines, they are still very clearly connected to Aldi versus being standalone. Now, let's go into some fun case studies. So I'm going to start with Carrefour, global retailer, a lot of good examples. Now, one of the things that we know with Carrefour is as Carrefour approaches private label, they look at the market in which they're competing. And then based on the market, that's how they approach their private label strategy. And it's different. And the sophistication level changes based on where they are. So if you start in Asia, they tend to focus on substitutable private label. So if you think of our quadrant, it's way down. It's the great value approach. I'm mimicking what's there. I'm price point based, and that's it. And that's all I need to be. As you move into Latin America, they start to get a little more focused. So I'm going to be price-based, but I'm going to localize this a little bit more. I'm going to add a little bit more value for my shoppers. But I don't need to go that extensively into an innovation-driven strategy or build a brand because those shoppers aren't ready for it yet. You continue on and you look at Eastern Europe, which tends to be a little closer to where the U.S. is as far as private label evolution. They start to get into some of that innovative and creative things. It's about diversifying the portfolio. It's about differentiating. But they're not so far along that incandescent spectrum that it's meant to stand alone. It's still connected back to the Carrefour banners in Eastern Europe. And then Western Europe, where we see these massive 40% share, 30% share. That is essentially where you have a lot of the brands as tiered brands with a line that tends to truly stand on its own. And that's where Carrefour puts its investments into innovation. And then as the other markets start to catch up from a sophistication level and a willingness and openness to private label, they can then take what they've created in Western Europe as their learning lab and pull it out into the other regions. You see them very focused in how they talk and promote the private label. They call it out, they are overt, they are focused in how they display it, but as you look at their promotions, the promotions are connected to the private label. It's not a total offer. Here in the US, you'll see fuel perk connections to loyalty cards and things like that, but it generally ties to what you buy as a whole, not just the private label product. Here they focus on their private label product. They're comfortable doing that. And the shopper's receptive. You also see, and this is actually very important, Europe is not only further ahead in the evolution of grocery and private label, but further ahead in online grocery. Carrefour does a phenomenal job of connecting the digital shelf with the physical shelf. And they do it in a way that is actually incredibly sophisticated. Not just for branded products, for all of their products. They look at it holistically as opposed to looking at this versus this and not necessarily connecting all the dots. This is definitely a best-in-class example of what we see in Europe, but as U.S. retailers try to grapple with and figure out how to approach online grocery here today, you're going to see them start to look to places like Carrefour or Leclerc in France and find a way to make that digital shelf stand out. Right now, it doesn't. If you go to Kroger's website, if you go to Walmart's website, they've got a service that they've thrown together, which is good, it's going to be the future, but if you look at the interface online, it is the most 2005 version of Amazon you can imagine. It's not pretty, there's no solutions, it's blocks. They're going to have to evolve that. The shopper's going to demand it, because the shopper who's now used to buying books online and apparel online is going to expect an experience that's just as sensory in grocery as everything else. And Carrefour has already taken that step to start to build the experience. In the US, if you want an idea of where I anticipate things going, take a look at Peapod or Fresh Direct's website. The sophistication of the offer, the way that you interact with the websites are so much more fun than Walmart and Kroger. That's where Walmart and Kroger have to be, and they likely have to be there in the next 12 months. Now, talking about US, let's talk a little bit about Walmart. So, with Walmart, we know they are trying the tiered approach. We know that as you go along the spectrum, they've got a number of brands. They've got their opening price point brands with great value. They've added in organic as a way to go premium. That takes you along the spectrum to brand. Walmart today does not have a brand that can compete with the simple truth in anything. They're just not there. They've kind of stayed on the bottom of our quadrant and struggled to figure out how to get above that. Now, I think in the near term, because of who Walmart is, that's okay. But as Walmart is competing head-to-head with Aldi and Lidl over the coming years, they're going to have to figure out a more sophisticated approach. Because right now, if they're stuck in that bottom tier, then we know Aldi and Lidl are actually above them in these more incandescent connections. Walmart's actually going to look less sophisticated, even if they're not. They've got to pick it up to catch up. If you look at Target, Target has always been actually very sophisticated in private label. And the thing with Target is they do it everywhere in their store. And they do it at a hierarchy level that shoppers recognize in their store. So as you think about grocery, you've got that good, better, best. With Simply Balanced really kind of being, even though it doesn't have the penetration that Simple Truth does, Simply Balanced being one of those brands that really could stand apart on its own. The Target shoppers may not recognize its private label. But if you extend it, and this is what makes them so good, and even if they're not performing in the same way that Walmart is today, this is why I think Walmart has to do more in private label. Because if you look at Target's approach to private label, Walmart's behind everywhere. If they're behind in grocery and really can't match everywhere else, there's a tremendous opportunity for their private label partners to help them move forward. What's interesting is if you think about the contribution that Target's private label gives to them from a sales perspective and a profits perspective, half of their profit comes from private label. That is huge. I don't know that that is the right approach for every retailer, but truly, a third of your sales and half of your profit is coming from private label. That also gives the private label manufacturers they partner with tremendous control. Amazon is trying private label. You know this. Started over 10 years ago. Started following the path of Target. Because here's the secret that everyone forgets right now as Amazon tries to enter into the grocery space. Amazon is really inherently just a mass merchandiser. The definition of a mass merchandiser is I can go there and I can buy everything. All categories in the same spot. It's a one-stop shop without the shop. But where they got their start was in general merch. So that's where they started their private label. And some of it's worked and some of it hasn't. But they know they need to happen. And so as you continue with the progression of Amazon's private label, you actually start to get a peek behind the curtain of where their next focus is. Which is why, as you start to look at things like the consumable private label that they're launching now, we know they're now ready to put their eye on supermarkets and on the grocery channel as a whole as the next place to go. So for our bricks and mortar retailers, they've got to be prepared. But from a private label manufacturer's perspective, it may be time to really relook and revisit the amount of resources you have calling on Amazon. Because what's interesting is grocery is a hard business to learn. They're trying to hire people in from the industry, but culturally a lot of times it fits our nose right. They need more help in this space than anywhere else in understanding how to find the right places to introduce private label and what should those offers be. And this is the thing, Amazon is not afraid to fail. Somehow, because of the nature of their investors being so forgiving, they actually can fail more than they succeed as long as the successes are really, really big. And so because of that, you see that after less than 2 months, they launched a private label diaper and had to pull it back because it wasn't the right type of thing. But then on the other side, as they've gone into the apparel space, they've gone all in, and then because of success, really been able to change the game in how they sell apparel online. And this is where they're going next. This is where the big opportunity is. And again, the shopper is ready for it. So it's just a matter of helping them figure out and being this is potentially the player that gets that business. Okay, a few minutes left. We're going to kind of go into Kirkland Signature. Look, everyone knows Kirkland Signature. This is who Costco is. This is why people shop at Costco. What's fascinating about Costco, though, is we've got to keep in mind that Costco's Kirkland Signature brand draws people into the store, but as people want to be in the store less and less, helping Costco explore how to put Kirkland Signature on their website or interact through Instacart, or some of these things that they're testing because they're not quite ready to go online for real. Helping them to do that helps extend their audience. Because I think at some point, right now Costco is actually behind in online grocery. And they're really behind if they want to keep that Gen Y family. They're going to need help in helping them in both understanding why it's important to look online, but also understanding which the category should be. Sam's Club is actually much more sophisticated than Walmart at private label. The reason is competition. Sam's Club is competing with Costco, even if they're not. But they're also competing with Walmart, right? Any shopper survey you do, if you look at cross-purchasing between Sam's and Walmart in certain categories, they're their worst competitors. So here's the thing, they can win in private label, competing against Walmart for all the reasons we talked about. Finance, brand, operations. And they're doing it. And they're doing it well. They're an interesting one to watch because what's interesting now is where Costco used to be the driver of innovation, Sam's Club has embraced technology in a way that's new and different. And even Walmart is learning from Sam's Club's technology play. I would almost argue that Costco and Sam's Club are going to switch positions in growth in the coming years, especially if Costco doesn't embrace online grocery. And as such, that creates a bigger opportunity for their private label business, which is so important to them. And then Aldi and Lidl, we know who they are. We know what they do. Lidl is a little more focused on branded than Aldi is, but those private label products at both of those stores are exceptional. And they're going to take all the learnings Aldi already has. Lidl is going to be coming with all that they have learned in Western Europe and Eastern Europe and make it work here in private label. And they can't import everything, so they're going to need partners to do that. We're suggesting at Kantar Retail that Lidl will have 600 stores in the US in 5 years. It's a big business to be able to pick up now or early on and grow it. That could drive growth for years, just organically. So they definitely are people to pay attention to. And then Simple Truth is that perfect example of the transcendent brand. Kroger doesn't do everything right, but this is one thing they have figured out. And I would expect them, particularly using Vitacost as that platform, to continue to expand the reach of Simple Truth beyond the store, which is something no retailer, even Costco, has figured out how to do yet. This is truly innovative in a space in which retailers themselves are stuck in this mindset that my private label is only for my store. It's not, and Vitacost and Kroger have proven that with Simple Truth in New York City. So really to conclude, a few things to remember. The country is ready for private label to really explode. The retail audience is here. The retailers that are growing are the ones that focus on private label in unique and powerful ways. And both from where the shopper's mentality is and where the retailers are in an evolution perspective, it's the perfect storm of opportunity for you guys. Because you go beyond that, you don't have to prove that private label products can be trusted. The truth is, a lot of times right now you hear all the recall things, all these things that are negative are not actually any times connected to private label. The branded products that are having trouble right now. The branded products start to prove themselves now. So it's an interesting time to be in the private label business, but it's a tremendous growth opportunity. So with that, to finish on time or close to time, I'll just